Okay, so let's talk about how we use tripods for talking head, pastors, announcements, things like that.
Cool. What you got?
I got basically, so there's twofold, right? You have your pastor that's dead center all the time in the pulpit, and there's not much movement. And for that, I envy most people because that is probably the best.
Yeah.
The best, because you're just, all right, I'm just sit here and listen to the message. But 90% of the other churches their pastors are going to want to move around. Now, when you're doing that, you don't want to, let me see, is this on? Whoa, hidden TVs. When you're doing that, that's where your drag comes in now. Now you're going to set your drag, maybe get a little tension in there, right?
All right, let's throw that on the screen.
And then
lock down
when I'm following also, lock that down. When I'm following my pastor, I'm typically telling the ops not to grip the handles. Because as soon as you grip the handles, you can see the shakiness, you can see the nervousness come through. You know, a lot of ops, if they're volunteers, they're still like, oh, I'm live out to the world. So in their minds, they're like, oh my gosh, and you can kind of see the shake, you know, you can kind of see that. So what we typically do is we have them set a bit of tension, and I use 3 fingers. And I'll have 3 fingers on there. I'm constantly following. And then, you know, when they get to a spot where they're walking, for instance, stage left to right, you know, and you're following them.
So why don't we show everybody an example? So I'll pretend like I'm the speaker on stage. So I'm engaging in my communication, and we're talking about what's going on in our environments, and welcome, we're so glad you're here today. And I'm just kind of taking a few steps back and forth. You can see how smooth that follow is. And so even though I may be doing this kind of deal back and forth a lot, the camera op is not jerking to make that happen.
And I mean, part of that is because you need good gear. Like, I think a lot of people don't want to spend money on a tripod, but if you get a bad one, it will never be smooth, right? There's the amount of money you have to spend on just this tripod head will blow your mind. But the more you spend, the better it is, and the more fluid it's going to be.
Yeah.
That's why they're called fluid heads.
Fluid heads, that's right.
Not because
fluid in there.
It's not full of 10W30.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and you really want to, I mean, and it depends on how fast they're moving back and forth and things like that. Like you talked about earlier, if they're going back and forth a lot and just going like this, you know, that's where I basically just say, hey, just don't move, just stay centered.
Maybe you just have a little wider shot.
A little wider. You can pull off to a wider shot for sure.
I can, like, one thing that maybe be different is, I don't think you mean this, but I would want to clarify, I don't want it to ever look like it's an unmanned camera.
There you go.
So even if the pastor's doing a little bit of weight shifting, you're just gonna barely shift center point a little bit.
Okay.
So it feels like there's someone still there.
You're not following as much. And then when they start to move, my style is leading. I'm leading them. So I'm basically ahead of them a little bit. So that when they actually find their stopping point, my frame is not.
So the direction they're walking, there's more room in the frame ahead of them. So that they won't outpace you.
And so when they stop, you're already there.
Yeah, you're there, and you just got to do a slight little adjustment to stop. You don't have to.
I think we can talk about this more in like a composition or framing video, but there's also emotion and theory behind that, right? If the pastor gets to the edge of the screen and the end of the frame is in front of his face, it makes you feel uneasy for a reason. There's a cinematic theory behind that. So,
all this empty space behind him, it's like, what's happening?
Right.
That's great. It's really important for a director and an operator to know those things and to be aware, because they're essentially controlling the emotion of some of those things more than just the sort of technique of the visual. It's an emotional thing as much as it is a technical thing.
Definitely. And like one quick thing I would add is, I think every speaker has a cadence. And the more you work with that speaker, the more you kind of learn their behaviors and their tics, right? And so, you know, with my pastor, I know that if he puts his glasses on, he's going to park at his podium and read the Bible. So my operators can kind of anticipate that. If he takes the glasses off, he's getting ready to move.
He's going to move.
Get ready. So you can learn those little tricks about the person that you're shooting to really help you, excel. And
I think one big thing to touch on as an op is we never have our, and I'm pretty sure you're the same way on this, our ops, their hands are always on camera.
Yes.
Because you just never know if at any moment that, and especially with my pastor, he's like, he can jolt and run across the stage at any moment.
Right.
So always on, never like, oh, he's just gonna stay there. Okay, cool. You know,
Because as soon as you let your guard down, he's gonna
move.
take off.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you're shooting a talk with multiple cameras, all cameras need to act like they're live all the
Yes,
time.
all the time.
Because if we're gonna edit this later in post, we don't know which shot we're gonna use when. So always be active, always be ready. Pretend like you're live to the world at every moment.
So what about some quick tips for somebody whose speaker doesn't move very much? How do you still keep it engaging and maybe a little creative if they're not necessarily just stuck behind a pulpit, but they're not doing the whole across the stage walking? Like, how can you still keep life in it?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that come to mind for me would be you kind of need to let the content on stage dictate your framing and dictate how you cut it. So if they're at a podium, I may want, if they're really still, static, you can get a really tight emotional shot, right? The tighter you are, the more you can convey facial expression and emotion. So I can get tighter. Then I also may want to have another camera that has a little bit wider so I can see some context of the podium.
The podium.
Because if the speaker's looking down at the podium and I have a tight shot, I don't know what he's looking at.
Yeah.
You know? So give me another wide shot that shows me his podium.
There's been times too where I've actually been having a tight shot on whatever they're reading, the Bible or their notes, where you can't necessarily see the notes because, you know, you want the preacher to actually talk about it without people looking at it.
Yeah.
But have a tight shot or like almost like a semi-reverse shot tight on that so that there's something sort of like context to go to.
You're establishing
You know,
something.
establishing, yeah.